Cool. All right, so we're running straight down. So MR for the month, 7 so far for the team. There's a new feature out in 12.10. It's health status, and it's I don't know if have either of you seen it so far? Yeah, it's pretty interesting. I think where it makes the most sense is at the Epic view, where you can see the work that you're doing on Epic, how much is at risk, and actually pretty interesting to see on the Postgres 11 upgrade. Epic, they're starting to use that, so it's a cool visualization. We should start using it where it makes sense. Didn't affect this team so much, but last month a couple of teams had a difference between MR counts based on team members and MR counts based on labels. So just make sure when we're writing MRs for our team that we have the group database label on them, so we have consistency across the different metrics. And I usually review labels on Mondays. I'll take a look at them later today, see how we're doing. On-call rotation for May, we still need some slots. Pat, you're not quite there yet. You don't have to sign up for on-call until you've been at the company for 3 months. So I think you still have, oh, actually, are you there yet?
It's going to be this week, I think.
Okay. So you are eligible next month to start doing on-call, and you can read up on it.
Okay.
And then just wanted to call out, I think everybody on this call knows that Postgres 11, there's an upgrade delay, trying to figure out when we can ship, what the trade-offs are. Do both of you know what's going on there? Do I need to repeat any of the details behind the scenes?
Sorry, can you say again?
Do you know what's going on with the upgrade delay, why it's being delayed?
Only vaguely, so we basically discovered that the intended downtime of 2 to 4 hours is not acceptable, and now we're basically working on a different solution that doesn't require as long as a downtime. That's
correct.
Today.
Yeah. So the chosen path right now is an in-place upgrade, and that could take 2 to 4 hours of a downtime window, an outage window, and customers weren't notified far enough in advance, and that's a pretty long window for a SaaS offering. So the infrastructure team is looking into alternatives, if we can narrow the outage window and stay with the current deployment path, or if we need to move to a different upgrade path where we do a switchover, where we build up the same infrastructure with Postgres 11, then just switch it over so we have a minimal outage window. They're still working on the details. I'm not sure what the outcome is yet. And they will talk about it on the Tuesday performance and availability meeting. So it's a weekly topic. It might come up today in the database sharding working group meeting as well. So.
And we're saying that it's likely to target 13.2. Is that like reliable information, or is that what we guess at this point?
Yeah, that's what they're guessing at this point. So if they had to go with the outage window, we need to give customers more time to let them know that we're going to have, however long the window is going to be. And if we have to go to the switchover methodology, then the estimates are it's going to take 2 months to implement and test that plan before we can roll it out. So that's why it seems like a lot of things are coming down to 13.2. But who knows, maybe something will happen and we can figure out a way to get it in sooner, but conservatively they're looking at 13.2.
And there's currently a discussion going on about CI, because we stopped doing 9.6 on CI, and I'm kind of concerned we should be running those tests for the database that we run on GitLab.com. There is a good discussion happening currently about getting this back, or if the nightly or the 4-hourly builds are enough to catch that.
There is a conversation, or you're asking for one?
There is one happening, sort of on the Epic as well. So Remy was asking if we can do if we can just switch back the 4-hourly builds.
Okay.
I guess it depends a bit on our comfort level if that doesn't really stop the build or the deployed pipeline, I think.
Do you have an issue for that? Because I actually brought up that topic in the sharding working group agenda. If you want to just link it there, that'd be great. So I'm not pointing people in the wrong direction, but yeah, it's something that needs to be added. Sorry?
I don't have another issue. That was just the few comments on the epic.
Now this is the one that I pointed to here.
Yes. Oh, sorry. No, there was another one. The one from Friday. Let me find that.
Okay. But yeah, it's a topic. It's one of the first topics in the sharding group, working group session to make sure that we bring back testing and assign a DRI so that someone follows up on it and make sure that it happens. And I volunteered Mac on that one since he's the quality representative in that meeting.
So if the upgrade gets pushed to 13.2, if that has to happen, is that going to have? So there was also sort of a discussion that was floated of an idea of whether it, at a certain point, it makes sense to leapfrog 11 and go straight to 12. Is that something that, I mean, it seems like we're pretty far along in the process, but if we're talking about pushing it out 2 milestones, is that something that we should reevaluate?
Probably not. The reason we had a discussion about it a couple months ago about why we're not going straight to 12. And there were some, for self-managed, there were customers that couldn't upgrade to 12 because they were on, I think AWS doesn't support Postgres 12 yet is one thing. And there were some other customers that just didn't want to jump that many versions. And at the time that we talked about it, it was only 12.0 and they didn't want to move to a 0.0 release, right? They wanted a much more stable one, which I think 12 is now on, is it 12.2 or 12.3 at this point in time? But regardless, at the time we talked about 11 or 12, those were the reasons not to go to 12. And since then, I don't know how much of our infrastructure we built up to start testing against 12. So there's probably still some confidence issues with moving to 12. So it's probably too late to move to 12. But yes, there's, sorry, I don't know what's going on with the birds over there. Yeah, there are folks that want to move to 12. We'll get a better cadence going forward. I mean, this is a big leap and something that was neglected and we probably should have done a better job at, but for now we need to stick with 11 because that's the tested path where we have confidence.
I was just trying to find the timeline because we also had a step in that timeline saying that we make Postgres 12 an opt-in. So you could basically start using Postgres 12 from that point in time. I don't find that timeline anymore. Maybe I can find it later. But I recall it was in the third release, so 13.3 was the one where we make Postgres 12 opt-in, and that also means that we have to have the right testing stuff going on our end.
I believe they have started some 12 testing, but all of the work that like distribution did was all on 11. So that's another reason why we can't go to 12 immediately. But yes, you're right. I have the timeline somewhere as well. And I do believe that the opt-in timeline for 12 was 13.3.
I mean, if we manage that timeline or that, opt-in feature to get that out in 13.3, then maybe that's a good point of having GitLab Commit 12 already, because I keep hearing from individual folks in infrastructure that it doesn't make sense really to go to Postgres 11 if we can also go to Postgres 12, and that's must be the case from 13.3 or whatever that release is, right? Perhaps that even lines up nicely.
Huh. So if we have to wait until 13.3, do we then just skip all the way to 12 and skip 11 altogether? Is that what you're suggesting?
So there's two perspectives from that. One is from GitLab.com, and as soon as GitLab itself supports Postgres 12 officially, I don't see why we wouldn't be using that. On the other hand, I think from a product perspective, we wouldn't want to skip 11 entirely because that's too fast for most of or many of our customers, I guess. Yeah. So from an application perspective, we would still say you have to be at Postgres 11 for a minimal version. That doesn't help us with partitioning because we can't be leveraging 12 features. But for GitLab Commit, it would be a benefit because we don't have to upgrade again next year.
Yeah. I will have to find that issue. I don't have it handy here, I think. Yeah, that's a longer conversation. We can talk about it later. All right, let's talk about this week in 13.0. So the last open item we have for 12.10 is exploring Citus as a sharding solution. So to recap, we're not going to go forward with Citus, right? Still be good to get some measurement, and we have the measurement issues. Yep. Okay. How much work is it going to be to get these last 3 issues done? How can we minimize the impact?
It's still, I mean, it's still a pretty decent amount of work. At least if we want to do any kind of, I mean, if we just want to do a side-by-side of like a couple queries and call it a day, then maybe that's not more than a few days.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't know how much use that's really going to be to do at that point. And any kind of real testing, I think, is going to be, talking about a week or 2 anyways. So I don't know if that's really worth it either.
Do you have any thoughts, Andreas?
So what would we get from that kind of information? We would have some measurements saying that Citus is perhaps faster in some scenarios, but well, important to cover.
The implementation underneath the covers of Citus, does it still use the internal foreign data wrappers that Postgres offers, or do they implement their own form of sharding? So would the performance measurements we get out of Citus be an apples to oranges comparison based on if in the future we need to do sharding and we're just using the foreign data wrappers?
I mean, I guess it would maybe be similar if we went to a sharded database of our own. It might be a similar strategy.
Mm-hmm. That's what I'm trying to get. So if we've spent a good amount of time with Citus, setting up the environment, starting to work on the data migration, can we get some early indicators on what sharding will get us? Because that could still be an issue in the future that, hey, even if we go the service extraction route, or if we don't, we have some indication on what sharding will get us. Can we get any kind of meaningful measurements based on the work that we've done so far?
I think most of the things that we were concerned about with Citus more so were issues that if we went the route of service extraction, they wouldn't be issues like the, replication of data, having cross-shard data,
mm-hmm.
cross-shard queries. Like that's one of the things that we would hope to alleviate by breaking up the database first.
Mm-hmm. So
I think if you're just looking at can we run this query and it runs on multiple nodes and it's roughly the same speed as running it prior, I mean, I think that is probably more given that that's going to work. If you're running a query on a single node, it's going to be fine.
Mm-hmm.
That's my thinking anyways.
Yeah, and currently, so we're working with staging data at the moment, and that means we don't have a lot of data to test with. So that might also limit the details that we get from that. But otherwise, I would agree. It's kind of to be expected that you see an increase and a decrease in timings.
Okay, so what I'm hearing is we shouldn't move forward with performance testing on this. We should just pull the plug on Citus altogether and switch over to the maintenance work that we have lined up for 13.0. And the reasons are, it's going to be pretty time consuming to get a comprehensive suite of tests, and the data will be somewhat inconclusive because it's a fairly small set of data. And yeah, we expect that we're going to get some query performance because it's sharded data and we know where the bottlenecks are going to be. Is that about right?
Yeah, that sounds good to me.
Okay. So jump over to 13.0. Andreas, you asked what do we expect to deliver for the repository mirror scheduling, pull mirror scheduling. That was, so when Josh was reviewing the issues for what we should do for 13.0, he thought that could have a big impact on performance. If we're moving away from sharding as our focus for now and focusing on maintenance, that he thought that would be a big one for us to bring in. And have a big impact on performance. And if we don't have a specific path we can go forward on this, and I put in the suggestion, maybe we spend the next team office hours to discuss how we can iterate on it.
Yeah, that makes sense. I think it needs a bit of work to figure out what we want to do with that, because what the issue outlines is basically the design problem and makes a proposal how to fix that, but the implementation details are unclear, and also if that fits the bigger picture is pretty unclear at this point. You know, the proposal itself talks about extracting the scheduling into a standalone worker process, and that's nothing that we've been doing before. So that needs, if we want to go down that route, that needs some perhaps even more help across the teams to get those processes running and all that. And perhaps it makes sense to discuss that before we start going down that route.
Yep. And that's one thing. So Sid has asked for a follow-up meeting on the service extraction proposal. And the one thing he wants to clarify is, well, actually there's two things to clarify. So how much overhead does that buy us? So by pulling out a service from the monolith right now, does that buy us, 5x overhead was the example that he used. And if so, is that like a hard limit to the point where once we hit that, once we've consumed all that growth, do we then have to shard at that point in time? And I think the answer is no. We can probably look at further decomposing services at that point in time, but it's a topic he wants to discuss. What does the service extraction get us? So as we're thinking about the repository pull mirror extraction, how much overhead does that buy us by pulling it out is something we need to keep in mind.
Mm-hmm. That also goes back to the idea of being more systematic about understanding the performance issues and sort of making a call which ones to tackle first, right?
Yep.
And we don't have a good answer to this at the moment. Like we know a few symptoms of this problem, this particular one, but it's not that we've been very systematic about that.
Yep. Okay. I'm going to break these up into 2 bullet points here. So do we want to go ahead with issue partitioning as an example? Are you talking about in this line, are you talking about on an existing table, like the events or CI builds?
Yeah, issues in this example. Sorry, I'll rephrase that.
Okay.
So what we discussed last week was it was sort of acknowledged that it's problematic to partition or to redesign the database with partitioning for existing features. I think that was sort of the gist of what we talked about last week, and that's why we want to do service extraction, because that gives us more greenfield type of work where we can introduce that early. That sort of goes back to issues as well, because we were planning and have those tasks ahead of us for partitioning issues, and we wanted to use that as an example for partitioning in general. And I wondered if we still want to do that, or if we perhaps take prefect and container registry, which is rather greenfield work, or kind of, and review that and start with partitioning implementations and the tooling and getting that kind of experience from those projects instead of doing that on GitLab issues. Both works. I'm just asking that question.
So my initial thoughts on that are, there's a few and they're disorganized, but on prefect and container registry, if we're already talking about partitioning, it seems, my first thought is it seems like a premature optimization. And my second thought is it doesn't buy us any real performance gains right now if we're looking at those for the future. However, it might be safer because we're not actually running it yet. So we can work out some of the kinks of partitioning since we haven't actually done that in production yet. So I'm torn. I'd like to see some performance improvements on our current implementation, but I don't know if there's any safe tables that we can take a look at for partitioning to get some performance improvements.
I can't really say if it's premature to talk about partitioning for prefect because I haven't seen prefect yet, or also container registry, but I'm thinking that those are services. It's not that they're going to be small. Like we will run them at GitLab com scale pretty soon, like when they're in production.
Yeah.
And that means they'll see a lot of data from the start, and that might already call for partitioning. And the other idea is that I think we should really, I mean, we shouldn't like. I want to avoid that we build services without that in mind, and then we end up in a situation where we say like, well, it's not working.
Yeah.
Or it's not as easy to do that. So why don't we start with that? Why don't we review those two services and figure out if they would benefit from it? Perhaps that lends itself as an example to start with partitioning as well.
Okay. Pat, you have any strong opinions?
Well, I have more of a question with, and this is me not knowing anything really about either one of those, but but that would mean the tooling for creating partition tables would have to live outside the main GitLab app, right? I mean, we're talking about like the tooling right now that I'm building is in kind of the app migration helpers, but we would really need to keep that, I guess in general, as moving towards, if we're going to be moving towards service approach, that really needs to be its own thing that lives on its own.
Yeah, that would make sense.
So we have to think about how we're gonna, I guess, take that work and make it not part of the main application.
Yeah, I mean, for starters, we could probably duplicate that for a while until we realize that it's working or that it's worth the effort to combine that. That could also work for a start. And we're also like, for a CI daemon, for example, we also consider Go. So that might also need its very own implementation of how to do that, right?
Yeah, that's kind of what I was thinking is, yeah.
Do we need an issue to track that then?
Yeah, I mean, so is container registry though right now is a Rails service? Is that?
No, it's going to live on its own.
No, I mean, but is it in Rails or is it something else? Is it Go or don't even know?
That's a good question. I don't even know.
Okay. Well, we'll look into that first, I guess. If it's Rails, and we can translate what I have done into that. If it's not, then we'll have to talk about how I will approach that.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, why don't we don't have to make a decision regarding the what we take as an example yet. Why don't we start with getting more familiar with prefect and container registry and doing those database related reviews? Perhaps that gets us into a better spot making that decision. What to tackle first.
Okay.
So should we create maybe 2 issues for both of those reviews?
Yep.
Perfect.
Who wants to volunteer for this? Creating issues.
Yeah, I can do that.
All right. That answers that question.
Who owns those 2 services? Do we know?
Dan Croft owns the container registry, so I think it's the create package team, and then prefect, I'm not sure.
Okay, thanks.
Yep. And so I think Andreas, you asked this question: should we do a database review? And my answer was yes. I mean, we should, and I put maintainer review, and yeah, you called out that we have well-defined for database for Rails. I guess I was thinking more along the lines of a non-specific scalability review. So making sure that they're not painting themselves into a corner, right? Making sure that we have confidence that the structure they're building makes sense and that it will scale and they're not following any anti-patterns. So basically just an overview. And I hate to get too process heavy, but I think for any new database that gets created, it needs to run through this team to make sure that we've reviewed it and make sure that it is good structure and follows all the right patterns. I'm not sure how to codify that yet. It kind of falls under the database strategy MR that's been sitting for a couple weeks now as we figure out if we're going to go do sharding or service extraction. But yeah, any new database I think should run through this team to make sure it gets a thumbs up. Cool. All right. We have 3 minutes until the next meeting. So any other topics we need to cover for today? All right, so Andreas create a couple issues. We'll talk about the poll mirror scheduling tomorrow during office hours. And then if we have time and we need to talk more about the database reviews, we can talk about them then, or just talk about them asynchronously once the issues are covered.
Sounds good.
All right.
Oh, I don't know if you saw my note. I'll be on PTO for Wednesday to Friday this week. I wasn't sure if I had to cancel again, but our plans are working out, so I'm going to be out Wednesday.
And did you all see the May 1st is basically company holiday now? Everybody
Family
see
and
that?
Friends Day.
Yep. So please take advantage. And if you already have that day scheduled, then take another one. All right. Thanks, everybody.
All right. Cheers.